final both days as we are looking at it. So on day 2 of the final. So if you have your final review packet and I don't need it back anymore. That's just for you. So a little later, sure. Sure, I don't need that anymore. So the other question someone asked is, what if the final review is due tomorrow? So questions 47 to 52, if you look at the final review, 47 to 52, that's the standard that we want to read right now. From 47 to 52. If you are reading that standard on your packet, Vanessa, want to read the standard at the top?
I can explain each step and solve it.
So, first type of questions you're going to see day 2 on the final. I can explain each step to solve the problem, like 47 to 52. It will be very much like that. I will give you the properties. You will be filling those in. There'll be one question. It'll be worth 2 points. So, most likely, someone said when they were looking at the questions, like 47, they said, well, what if mine only took 3 steps? I'm going to give you all the parts of the equation. You just have to put in, is it distributive property? Is it the addition property of equality? You just put the property behind it, okay? I will give you all the steps. The next part, if you would turn in your packet, yeah? Shh, quiet, please. The what? Yep, I'll give you a word bank also. Yep. So I'm going to give you a word bank just like that's on the review, and I'm going to have the problem solved all the way going down. You just have to fill in the right ones. So now turn to 58 to 71 in your review packet. 58 to 71, and maybe it's not all the way to 70. Yeah. If you're reading it, what does it say here? Yeah.
I can interpret the parameters in a linear function in terms of the context.
So, I can interpret the parameters in a linear function in terms of its context. There will be 4 questions like that. So this is the questions on the review. The first one was from 47 to 52, 58 to 71. There's 4 questions, 2 points each. This might be a question where I say something about when you look at those questions that were in your homework where I say, oh, when you look at question number 58 and you were looking at that table of people and cost, and then I might say, well, what does the slope mean? And you say, well, the slope equals this, and I'll say, well, what does it mean in terms of this problem? Meaning, I don't want to just know that the slope is a ratio of numbers, which some of you still tell me slope has an x with it, and it doesn't. Slope is simply a ratio of 2 numbers, and then in terms of this problem, it would be, oh, this is how much it costs per 1 person. That's what the slope is trying to tell us, a unit rate or our rate of change. So there'll be 4 problems where you have to interpret it. The next questions are from 1 to 5, I think it was. Create and solve an equation. So create and solve equations or inequalities. There will be 4 questions, 3 points each. So you might be asked to write that inequality, and then you might have to solve it. So kind of like those first on the review packet, 1, 2, 3, 4, when you were writing those type of questions, 1 through 5, creating it and writing that inequality. 3 points each, there'll be 4 questions. So there's a few more standards the second day on the final. And again, we'll go through the review in just a minute. The next ones are from 26 to 28 in your review packet. 26 to 28. The standard is that we are going to, so we'll want to raise our hand to read that standard, 26 to 28. Yes, go.
I can summarize. Categorical data by making 2-way table.
Okay, so I can summarize categorical data by making a 2-way table. Now, what's going to be different than what was on the test? On the test for our statistics unit, you had to, it was the one with the dog and the people with dogs and no dogs and cats. You made the table. This time I'm going to give you the table, and I'm going to ask you to calculate the relative frequency. I might ask you to calculate the relative frequency of the row. I might ask you to find the relative frequency of the column. Or I might ask you to find the relative frequency of that whole table. So you need to understand the difference of the words, meaning that if I'm looking at a row, rows are going across, that means all of these numbers at the back are going to be 1.0. If you are doing a column relative frequency, that means at the bottom of each one, I would see a 1 at the bottom of all of those. And if we are doing a total one, the only place where I'm going to see the 1 is going to be in that total box. All the rest of them, like all the rest of the numbers in here, are what I'm taking and dividing by whatever that total was, okay? And if you're not sure how to do relative frequency, look back in your stats unit in Unit E. We did relative frequency of those. I know the questions in the homework just say a question like, well, what's the relative frequency of who would do this compared to who would do this? That's where you only have to divide. I'm going to ask you to make this column either by row, column, or total, and then I'm going to ask you to interpret it. What do I mean by interpret it? Well, then you would tell me, like if we were looking at the one from the last test, I'd say something like, you'd want to tell me something about the cat to the dog. You know, like there are more people that had cats and no dogs, or no dogs and a cat, or something like that. And you would tell me a comparison statement, and you'd use the percentages in that comparison statement, okay? The last standard that we are going to be taking a look at for, is it the last one, or is it two more? Two more. So, the next one that we are looking at is for questions 72 to 95. 72 to 95. Those are where I ask you to solve the equation or the inequality. This is where you had the absolute values. This is where you had the compound inequality. So, there will be 8 questions, 3 points each. This is the literal equations part, okay? So it could have absolute value, it could have an inequality or equality, it could have literal equations, it could have all of those like 72 to 95. 8 questions, 3 points each. And the last standard that we have not talked about is sequences. So you need to be able, from 53 to 57 are the questions in your review. You need to be able to write an arithmetic sequence, recursively and explicitly, and then find like the 7th term, or find the nth term, or find out which number is, what term is a certain number, okay? It's very much like the ones you were doing in the review, and this goes back, I think this is in lesson C, unit C that we did these. Okay? 2 questions, 3 points each. The 2 questions, I think they're like a 2-part question. Like I might give you a sequence and say write the recursive, and now tell me the 6th or 7th or 8th or 10th term. Then I'll give you a explicit, and I'll say, okay, now find whatever term, or give you explicit, rewrite it as recursive, and then tell me a certain term. Okay? When we were looking at this in the other class, so making sure you have all these down, and I will be attaching this on the daily planner so that you can kind of look at it. Anyone need me to look or show anything else on that? Goodies? So, I don't know if they're fun or not, but they are review links. There's this other game that's kind of algebra, because I had some people say I'm totally done with my whole packet to review, and I don't know what else to look at. And I would suggest going back over the notes from our units A, B, C, D, and E, just making sure you read through them and kind of looking at those examples. There's a Quizlet here, Alg Final. It says 9th grade flashcards. It's the same pretty much as our 8th grade one. There's another one here. You do, if you're going to put those in, you do have to copy the link that isn't like hyperlinked to that. So I just wanted to make sure you're aware of that. So we'll have our 2 days of our final math testing, and then Friday we're up there. So questions as we look at starting with 47 through on your packet. Questions on anything, and then the rest of the time is going to be yours to work after we go through if there's any questions. So I'm just going to kind of keep going in order from where we left off last week on Thursday. So as I'm looking at 47 and those types of questions, any that you'd like me to take a look at or go over, let me know. So 47 to 51, any major questions? How about 52, where we are looking at what does, if we are looking at the first step in solving as, the second step, what method did she choose? Here's our recursive and explicit formulas. I had someone in the other day when we were looking at the recursive and explicit, and they were asking me, what's an easy way to find, like I think it was this 6th year. You were given up here to do the recursive formula, and a lot of times when you do the recursive formula, if you're going to try and find the 6th one, you really need to find the 1st, the 2nd, the 3rd, the 4th, the 5th in order to get the 6th, right? That's what recursive means. It's like reoccurring. But if you change this formula to an explicit formula, it's going to be a lot easier to find the 6th one. So my hint is, just because you just found recursive, you don't have to use that. You can change it to the other form and it will probably be much easier. So as you are looking at 58 or 53 to 57, questions on any of those with the explicit recursive. So the interpreting the parameters, that's the next part of the final that we talked about. 58, 61, as you're looking at those. Questions on any of those. X-intercept, Y-intercept. So when you walk in tomorrow, yes, your whole package should be done. And those of you that don't have it done, you can show it. If you have it done, you can show it to me today. Tomorrow, what if you don't have it done? That's what I'm going to take some points on. It's your last grade of quarter 2. You need to have it completed. I'm going to take a look at that, and then I'm going to come around and I'm going to give it back to you because I don't want it. I don't need it because you should keep it to study. So, questions up here? It's going to count as homework grade, so it's going to help. Probably it's better than having a 0 for a grade, but.
How many points is it?
How many questions are there?
95.
Whoa!
I don't know
Whoa.
if it's that many points.
Yes!
I
Because if you
don't
get it
know
done,
if
you
it's
get
that
95 points.
Other questions
really?
from the review?
No.
Other questions from the review?
Great.
Okay?
Really help.
So domain and range of functions, these were some of the ones that we went through in the other classes, in the other class. Quiet please. So, absolute value. You have to remember, if it's absolute value ever equals a negative number, that's when you have the no solution. Whereas when absolute value is positive, that's when you're going to split it and you really have 2 possible solutions. One is where you keep everything the same. One is when you do the opposite. Okay? The most common mistakes on absolute value is that people think there's only one answer when they're doing the test. So, when you look at an equation like this, remember you're always trying to get absolute value totally by itself first. Once you do that, that's when you split. You take the opposite of the inequality, the opposite of the number. Then you keep it the same and you are solving those. Okay? So when you are taking a look at your different absolute values and how those work, equations, making sure you know when you have no solution different than your absolute value. When you have infinitely many, you're all real solutions. Emily, question? 85. We did 85 in the other class, so it's up here. In 85, we're trying to solve for m. That means we subtracted the 2nx from both sides first, and then we're going to divide by our what's with the m, which is x. I would take either one of these 2 answers. I would take it written either way. Yep. They would. That's why I would take it written this way, or I would take it with this. But you can't just cancel this x and not have, so you can either have it as p over x minus 2n, or you can have that whole thing over x. Does that make sense? I'll take it either way. Any other questions? So in class today, your goal is to get finished